welcome to the Art Channel. In this film we're visiting the Hayward Gallery in London to see an exhibition of work by Andreas Gursky. Gursky is a German photographer, born in 1955, who lives and works in Düsseldorf.
The son of a commercial photographer, Gursky's family moved from East Germany to West Germany, and he trained in Düsseldorf, becoming part of the Düsseldorf school, changing the way we look at photography, exploring consumerism, mass media, mass consumption. We're standing in front of an image called Salerno from 1990. This is a pivotal image for Gursky. It's taken with an SLR camera from a fairly high viewpoint, but it's the first time that he digitally manipulates it after the photograph has been taken. And it's really the beginning of a new way of making work for him. This attention to minute detail, everything being in detail, and the photograph really becomes something different.
He gives us this privileged view. It's kind of encyclopedic, isn't it? We're standing on a high viewpoint, as you say, perhaps on the side of a cliff, looking out over at this port scene. And so you have this full embrace of the landscape, the geography, the town, the port. But gradually your eye is sort of pulled, tempted into the picture to try and make sense of all of these details. And this, as you said, is really this turning point whereby he begins to alter the meaning of the picture through these interventions, so that fundamentally it disrupts that sort of authority of the photograph and of our trust in it.
We're standing in front of a photograph called Emerson, and this was made in 2016. Emerson, the buying delivery company that the whole world seems to use. This is a huge warehouse in Phoenix, Arizona, and what Gursky has done again is put together a series of digital images to make one, well, I don't know whether I can call it a photograph. It's an image made using photography. These seemingly random objects fill the space. It's absolutely terrifying, and we get the detail of every single layer of our consumerism. They look, as I said, random. Pickers have to go and basically use a map to find the barcodes of the objects that we're going to buy, put together and have posted to us. For me, the most engaging and frightening part of this image is the sort of Stalinist instructions on the pillars at the back. Make history, have fun, and work hard.
Well, my question inevitably is, are these real? Has he invented them? Has he found them somewhere else? But fundamentally what you have in this picture is the meeting between those two interests in his photographs. The subject of Amazon, globalization, this shift to an online economy, the vastness of it, the scale of stuff that we consume. And of course, the pictorial and formal qualities of the image, this sort of almost infinite variety of detail that drowns you effectively. It pulls you in. It's like the sort of siren song. And of course, that's a nice metaphor, isn't it, for the relationship we have with consumption today. This image is called Uthoff from 2017, so it is a part of a body of very recent work and a new interest, whereby Andreas Gursky is thinking about making images with iPhones. And the starting point for this particular photograph was an iPhone. And he's traveling in the United States, photographing out of the window. And that, of course, is such a sort of common experience, that is moving through landscapes at speed in a car. And you can see the smudging here, almost sort of the edge of the window. But the one thing that really strikes me about the picture is its painterly qualities. It's almost like a kind of academic painting of the 19th century. And of course, we have to acknowledge that he's exploring a really contemporary sort of challenge to photography with the mass of mobile phone images. How can we create a kind of hierarchy of value about what's worth keeping and what's worth looking at? It's almost infinite, isn't it?
It's interesting that he uses his iPhone initially almost like a sketch, but he does stick maybe to a kind of hierarchy because that image is a sketch, and he goes back with a much more serious camera and takes this image. So for him it's not quite what it needs to be, but as you say, it plays into our obsessional recording of our lives and everything around us. And I think this is very beautiful, and it's very different, and it's one shot, so it's quite different from those montages that we've been looking at. And it is part of that American tradition of recording the West, recording the landscape, recording settlements. And here you have a working class settlement, you have caravans, you have a kind of prefab housing set against this magnificent range of mountains. So there's a real contrast. It's quite a poignant image. This amazing image is called Mon Palace, which is a neighbourhood of Paris, and this was made in 1993. This is actually two photographs spliced together. They were taken from the lobby of a hotel over the road. It's amazing. It's a bit like a kind of slightly grubby Mondrian painting. It's the dream of modernism, a machine for living in. We look at it from two distances, I suppose. You try and take in the whole thing. You then get closer and you see all these individual, untidy, interesting lives happening, little vignettes of people's lives. 750 flats in this very famous apartment block, and I think it is actually a very beautiful image, and it's a completely impossible image. You can't make one photograph of this, and you can't take one view of this, so it's a beautiful confection.
And it becomes a gentle comment, really, on that sort of resistance against standardization, uniformity, the scale of the modern world in architecture, in landscape, in urban scenes. And the eye is inevitably drawn into these individual windows and how people occupy these spaces. That it's like a beehive, really, these sort of hundreds of different sort of facets of anonymous people, but it feels very sort of real and approachable. Nevertheless, they are contained and housed within this enormous superstructure that seems to just sort of fill the entire horizon. And he plays with perspective, whereby naturally the ends would appear to taper a little, and of course he can override that natural, as it were, vision we'd have looking out to the building from the street. And that's an example of the sort of subtle manipulation and alteration of the image.
Made in 2009, 99 Cent is a very interesting and famous image from Gursky. And it's been mimicked many, many times, this idea of this terrifying inventory of our consumerism, the kind of bottom end of our consuming, everything here under $1. And this is an image that is manipulated. It's sewn together, it's stitched together, it's many, many images. It has lots of viewpoints and no viewpoints in a way. Quite obvious things, I guess, that he's done. He has reflected all of these objects, all of this stuff in the ceiling, so it feels very, very claustrophobic. And he's also hyped up some of the colours, the yellows, the greens, the reds that are on this packaging. He says he isn't interested in individual lives. What he's interested in is the way we live, we work, we consume, the way we move through spaces, and this being a very kind of familiar, constructed space. I do think it's interesting that this at one point was the most expensive photograph. It went for, I think, £1.7 million in an auction, and it is a comment on consumerism, so it's an odd image.
It's like an altar to consumption, and I don't know whether to feel sort of titillated by it, all of this sugar, all of these different flavours, colours. It's like a child in the candy shop, or to be disgusted by it. For all of this sort of excess, this mounds of stuff piled high, cheaply, in this wholly available way. I mean, it's an extraordinary image because the eye doesn't know where to look. There is this equivalence all over the picture. But also, there's a sense in which we are actually there, almost in the space, in the shop itself, except for the higher elevation. We're given that access, that privileged view, across the whole length of the shop and all of these aisles. And where does it leave us? Well, puzzled. It's so familiar, and yet it's estranging at the same time.
I think what Gursky manages to do very impressively is to constantly reinvent what a photograph might be. I think it's corny to say, oh, a photograph doesn't tell the truth anymore. We've known that for many, many years. But the idea that you can stitch together a number of images and you can talk about consumerism, environmental issues, you can talk about work environments, and not get into the personal is a very clever thing to do, because they are always huge, impressive images.
Well, he takes full on that historic role of photography as a medium of documentation. And he really embraces that kind of postmodern condition of questioning everything that we look at, but furthermore, the distinct status of a photographic made image that purports to be truthful and real. And in a way, he's exploring that gap between those conditions and leaves us, in a sense, constantly asking, what is it we're looking at and what does it mean? Thank you for watching the Art Channel. You can subscribe to the channel and also give the films a thumbs up. You can follow us on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook.